Hello guys, today I want to show you one open source project with Laravel and Livewire by Andy, which is Laravel Cloud Pricing Calculator. And Andy open sourced that, and here it is on GitHub. So we will run through the code, see how Livewire works, but even if you don't work with Livewire, we will talk about Laravel things like separating that into a service, unit tests, and how to use OpenAI API in the same form. Also, Andy has written quite a detailed blog explaining the technical challenge and what he did here, and I will also link that in the description below. Let's begin. First, I will show you how it works, and then we'll dive into the code. So on top, we have AI-powered configurator, and we will discuss that separately, but generally, this is the calculator, and on top right, you see the price already calculated. So by default, it's selecting production. You may change to sandbox, for example, and then that is refreshing automatically the total number. So basically, the dynamic and interactive form suggests you to choose the parts of your Laravel Cloud setup. So for example, if you choose MySQL to Node database, you may save a lot of money. Or if you choose another instance of server, you may pay more in the end. Or for example, if you choose PostgreSQL, it may be much more expensive, but at the same time, PostgreSQL has Hibernate, which may help you save costs for hobby projects, for example. So all in all, a lot of drop-downs and checkboxes, and then at the end, you have your monthly cost. This is all without database calls because all the numbers are in the config of Laravel, and also without refreshing the page because it's powered by Livewire. Now let's see the code. First, the main route of the page is to the pricing controller index, and if we look into that index, it's just this. We take the config values and pass that to the blade view. This is interesting thing because in the config, we have all those numbers here listed. All the pricing from official Laravel homepage, it's not in the database, it's in the config. So to conveniently work with those values and show those values in the blade, they're passed like this to avoid repeating this every time. Now we have config as a variable. And in that pricing blade, here's where we have Livewire included. Two components, AI configurator, again this will be a separate topic later in this video, and then the main form of pricing calculator. So let's see the code of that pricing calculator. If you don't work with Livewire, you may treat that as Laravel controller for calculations. So a lot of properties, what people can choose with their default values. Then we have mount, which is kind of like constructor for Livewire component, and boot, which is almost like pre-constructor, I would call that. And then we get the default values from pricing service. And this is where that pricing service is really important. I really like the separation of concerns, that all the calculations are inside that pricing service. We'll get that in a minute. Then we have a method reset usage to plan defaults, which basically is resetting everything to 0. And this is a method inside of the same Livewire component. So this assignment for the default values. And then the main part of dynamic behavior is happening in the updated method. So this is how Livewire works. Whenever some property is changed, for example, on the page we change the input here, then it is updating the value, automatically calling the updated method. And then depending on which property is updated, we perform calculations. First, there's distinction between numeric props and then formatting of those values. And then depending on if it's a plan, then we validate inputs for plan. What's inside? The validation calls the pricing service again with get available sizes. So basically validating that we cannot choose anything that is not on the page. We have reset for everything, and then that updated function is over and all the properties are recalculated with so-called computed properties in Livewire. So we scroll down to this part, computed properties. Base plan cost is calling the service with computed, which basically means recalculated, and then all the calculations are within that pricing service. So it's called calculate this, calculate that, calculate monthly compute cost, database cost, and at the very end it should be total cost. Yep, this one, total monthly cost, calling those properties one by one and then rounding up the cost. Now let's see what's inside that service and why it is that important. Here's that service file, and I think it's a very good example of service. We get the values from the config, we get OpenAI API key, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then the calculations. Return this from config, return that from config, make some calculation by multiplying stuff, So all the calculations are separated from the main Livewire component, or you can call it controller. So service doesn't even know where it is called from. It may be Livewire component, it may be Laravel controller, it may be tests, it may be some queued job. This is again a good example of separation of the logic. And one of the benefits of such separation is that it's easier to test that logic separately from frontend, from Livewire. So there's test unit pricing, and there are tests for all those different prices, for example, bandwidth. So here's the test with explanation in the comments that service calculates the value correctly. So we're working with just the numbers and calling the service which uses the values from the config, which is a good example of unit testing, not feature testing. So service class is our unit where we have all the calculations, and our goal is to test whether those calculations are correct. So we're not testing the public-facing page structure, we're testing the backend unit of calculations. A very good example of unit tests. And finally, I promised to show you this AI configurator, which works like this. You need to describe your project in your own words, and then it will automatically calculate and suggest the server plans and cost. And here's my example kind of prompt. Personal blog with 100 visitors, so minimum bandwidth, and in Markdown, so no database needed. We generate that configuration. We will wait for, I don't know, 5 seconds or something. Oh yeah, it's done. Monthly estimate, $4. Why it is $4? Let me see. So sandbox plan. I'm not sure about this one because custom domain is included in the production only, but then the calculator suggests the lower flex size, also no database, and no other additional options. So then the cost comes to $4.89. This is a good example again of AI prompt, which is transforming that text into actual properties of Livewire component. Let's take a look at the code. This is that Livewire component which sits on top of the page with these properties and the main function of generate configuration. It also uses the same pricing service, just a separate method of generate pricing configuration from user description. And then if there are no errors, we have this dispatch apply configuration. So let's see those two methods, what's inside generate configuration and then apply AI configuration. So that service method looks like this. API call to OpenAI with API key in .env, and this is the prompt. You are pricing configuration assistant. Make sure to consider plan limitations and bigger text. The content is configuration data and user description is also in the prompt. Then we get the response from AI, response JSON. If it is successful, we decode the JSON and then build the response. So then building the response transforms that into details, which at the end is probably calculated, this calculate cost, this calculate this and that, and return the details. So this is what is shown on top here with monthly estimate. But then we need to also refresh the form, right? And this is where Livewire event is triggered. This dispatch apply AI configuration is a method in another Livewire component, so not in AI configurator, but in the main pricing calculator. We find this, and this is how the events are described in Livewire. We have another method, handle AI configuration, what's inside. So it's just refreshing this variables properties from configuration values. And then again, those properties are computed properties with updated method, then the full form would automatically refresh. So this is kind of the rundown overview of this project. Quite a small project, but a very good example of a few concepts. First, the use case for Livewire, one form, dynamic form, interacting form for calculations, without writing any JavaScript, without running npm commands. It's all kind of in one big component. But then the second concept is separating the calculations for that form in a separate service, which is testable with unit tests. And then that AI thing is kind of a cherry on top to call ChatGPT to ask it to transform that text-based description into parameters of the form. What do you think about this example? What you did like or you didn't like? What would you have done differently? Let's discuss it all in the comments below. And if you haven't yet used Livewire and want to learn that, I have a course recently updated, Livewire for Beginners, with example of Laravel 12 Starter Kit. I will link that one in the description below. That's it for this time, and see you guys in other videos.